Here, we can see the basic communication between a C# application and an API. The application sends a request to the API. The API receives the request and processes the information. Once processing is complete, the API sends a response back to the application. That response is commonly returned as structured JSON data. So remember, the application sends the request, and the API returns the response. This diagram shows the complete request and response process. First, the client application sends a request to the API. The API receives the request and passes it to the processing infrastructure. The server processes the information and prepares the result. Then, the API sends a response back to the client application. That response often contains structured JSON data. So the basic flow is simple. Client sends a request, the server processes it, and the client receives a response. This image shows the difference between a JSON request and a JSON response. First, the client application sends a request to the API. The request contains information about what the application wants the API to do. The API processes that request and generates a result. Then, it sends the result back as a JSON response. So remember, the request contains what we send to the API, and the response contains what the API sends back to us. This image shows how information is organized inside a JSON response. JSON stores information using key-value pairs. For example, the key name can contain a person's name. The key age can contain a number, such as 25. And the key active can contain a Boolean value, true or false. By organizing data this way, our C# application can easily find and use the information returned by the API. This image shows the different types of data that a JSON response can contain. A JSON response can contain text, known as a string. It can contain numbers, such as 25. It can also contain Boolean values, true or false. JSON can also contain null values, arrays of multiple items, and nested objects. These different data types allow APIs to return simple or complex, structured information to our application. This image shows how an LLM API returns its generated result. First, the AI model processes the user's prompt and creates an answer. But the API usually does not return only the answer. Instead, it places the generated content inside a structured JSON response. That JSON response is then sent back to our application. Finally, our application extracts the generated text from the JSON and displays it to the user. This image represents nested JSON. Nested JSON means that one JSON object can contain other objects or arrays inside it. Think of it like boxes inside other boxes. To find a specific value, our application must move through each level of the JSON structure. For example, we might navigate through choices, then message, and finally, content. Understanding these levels is important because real LLM API responses often contain deeply nested JSON data. This image shows the difference between a JSON object and a JSON array. A JSON object uses curly brackets. It stores related information as key-value pairs, such as a user ID, settings, or an active status. A JSON array is different. It uses square brackets and stores multiple items in an ordered list. For example, an array might contain several models, messages, or results. So remember, curly brackets represent an object, and square brackets represent an array. This image shows that an API response contains more than just JSON data. It also includes an HTTP status code. For example, 200 means the request was successful. The application can then read and process the JSON response. But if something goes wrong, the API may return an error status, such as 404, which means the requested resource was not found. So when working with APIs, always check the HTTP status code first, and then process the JSON response appropriately. This image shows two possible types of API responses. On the left, we have a successful response. The API processes the request correctly and returns the expected JSON data. On the right, we have an error response. Something has gone wrong, so the API returns error information instead of the expected result. For example, it might return a 404 error when a resource cannot be found. Our C# application should always check the response and handle both successful results and errors correctly.